Hello. Everybody hear me okay? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. This is Bridging the Phone Gap, cross-platform mobile development. I'll start off who I am. Dan Slack, web developer, app developer for Niche Solutions. That is our website, my email, my Twitter handler, and our GitHub repository. All of the samples for today is up there right now. So if you want to jump on there and download it, you can go ahead and do that. So the agenda for tonight we're going to first talk about mobile web applications, which really comprises the core part of PhoneGap. If you don't know how to develop mobile web applications, PhoneGap is going to be kind of tough. Then we're going to do a little demo on that, and then we'll move on, probably have the break then. We'll move on to talking about what is PhoneGap, some of the PhoneGap APIs. I'll do another live coding demo for that. Hopefully be able to deploy it. It'll be tough to see, but I'll deploy it live onto this little tablet, and I'll show you, but I can't plug it in, unfortunately. And we'll also talk about extending PhoneGap with their plugin framework. And then finally, some general design considerations when you're developing mobile web applications in general. So first talk about what is a mobile web application. This is my own definition. If you look on dictionary.com or whatever, it'll probably say something different, but this is what my definition is. A mobile web application is an application that's been designed keeping in mind keeping in consideration the limitations of mobile devices, as well as also leveraging their advantages. So, for example, having a touch interface. You know, most modern devices are touch interface. Being able to leverage that kind of pinching and zooming, having a canvas application to draw, or leveraging that kind of stuff is important. Having geolocation built in, so being able to say, hey, I want to look at pictures on Flickr, hit a button and, oh, you're in, Riding Mountain, here's a picture on Flickr, right? Leveraging that kind of information. At the same time, the limitations are things like device size. We're not dealing with 1368 or whatever, huge resolution monitors. We're dealing with 480 by 360 or 1024 for larger tablets. Size of the screen is a huge limitation, as well as being online all the time. Being inside of Winnipeg, you don't have many dead zones, but you leave outside of Winnipeg and your phone coverage can be terrible. So if you need to be always on, well, you can't really be, because you have to handle those scenarios when you go offline. However, this means that we can, because we're a mobile web application, we can actually use our existing skill sets. So if you are a web developer, you developed in any of the major web languages, HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS3, you can do mobile web development. It's that simple. We can use all of our skills, the JavaScript, the frameworks, all that stuff we can use when we're developing these things. As I mentioned, we can leverage the HTML5 API. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with what you can do with it. There are the major ones that people talked about when they came out, things like geolocation, things like local storage, being able to persist data, and that means you can go offline. When the person comes back and they're offline, oh, you can say, oh no, here's your, here are the notes that you added, or here's the information you've added. But the HTML5 API is constantly growing. I think when it's supposed to go final is something like in 2020, but that's not stopping people from accessing the draft specifications that are out right now. So things like File API, 5 or 6 years ago, the idea of a person writing a JavaScript application to access your file system would be terrifying. But now on a mobile web application, no, people want to be able to save files to their file system. There's an accelerometer specification. There's PIM, personal identification, I think it is PIM, contacts. API being brought in, all those things, they're all in draft mode. So, some browsers, if you're not on the dev channel, for example, of Chrome, you may not see these. But device manufacturers are implementing these right now. All the current devices are introducing them, adding them to their browser, so you can have access to that stuff right now. So there's a couple of design considerations when you're developing with mobile web applications. When you design for the mobile web, this is a bigger consideration if you're also trying to design the same application for a tablet or let's say a desktop. You need to know what your device is. You know, when a person accesses it with a desktop or a laptop or a tablet or a phone, you need to know how to react and how to display that accordingly. And there's two major ways you can do that. One is server side. So if you're running your own web container, you know, Apache, Nginx, Tomcat, whatever, there are ways to check what your device is coming in, what it can do. The major one that I'm most familiar with is Wurfel, which is a large, you know, several megabyte data XML file that contains all of the devices sort of out there and what they can support. So it even includes some of like the Nokia flips, you know, that you could only do WML. It includes that. So, you know, you can kind of say, hey, you know, you're coming in and you can't support HTML5, splash screen, you know, you can't see this, right? There are maybe, I don't know, maybe a better way, depending on if you're on the cloud, because the problem is if you're doing Wurfel, you have to maintain it. So when there's a new phone come out, you know, Samsung comes out with the S4, Apple comes out with the iPhone 6, you know, they're going to have to update the database. So you, as a developer, have to now worry about the server side, which is a pain. There are cloud services that you can do that. So you send a request using Apache or Nginx or whatever to say, hey, you know, what is this device? Give me the stuff I care about. What's the resolution? What is the HTML5 things that it can handle? The downside what happens is that your server can then say, okay, you're a tablet. Load the tablet JavaScript file, or load the tablet CSS file, or load the desktop CSS file. But now you have your code base that is now, you know, spread apart. You have multiple files to actually maintain. It can be a pain. Client side would be another way of doing this, where instead of doing saying you have a Samsung S3, this model number, you can see this, you can just simply do media queries, CSS media queries to say what's your maximum device width, what's your maximum device height, are you in landscape mode or are you in portrait mode, and you can resize and scale things dynamically. It's not as you can't do as much with it. Because if you know much about CSS, there's only so many things you can actually do with it. You know, being able to heavily modify the entire content with using CSS, you know, is not really easily done. So you have to go to JavaScript frameworks, and there are JavaScript frameworks that can handle that too with user agent detection. The problem with that, of course, is now you have a lot of conditionals, and you have a giant CSS file that has all these media queries. You can resolve a lot of these issues with build systems and that kind of stuff. Really, the best solution is sort of both, honestly. You know, have a server-side solution for, you know, being able to switch when you need to. Desktop, maybe go to a different set of HTML files. When you're on mobile, you go to a completely different set. And then on client side, you would actually do even more just look and feel tweaking so that it fits, you know, your tablet, flows nicely, and what have you. So a little bit about testing. There are Chrome extensions, or WebKit extensions, I guess, or that can let you easily switch user agents. So a lot of the server-side testing is done using headers and user agents. So if you're a WebKit BlackBerry browser, it detects that and knows what you are. You can switch that using the Chrome extension to say, let me test using iPhone and see what you get. At the same time, you can also switch resolutions. iPhone is this resolution, scale your browser, and literally scale your browser down to fit. What I use for mobile web development is a product called Ripple. This is a screenshot of Ripple. So Ripple is a really useful tool that comes out of a company called Tiny Hippos that was acquired by BlackBerry. It's open sourced, and what it lets you do is, it's a lot of information on the screen, but what it lets you do is open up your web application and say, I am running it on a certain device. There's a device, a little tab, it's kind of hidden there, but you click on it and you can pick a device, an iPhone, BlackBerry or whatever, and it will actually reskin the middle part and change the styling and the size based on the resolution of your device. The Ripple also supports BlackBerry's WebWorks, which is their HTML5 framework out of the box, but it also supports PhoneGap as well as mobile web. There are some issues with the PhoneGap support that I'll talk about in a little bit later. But the other things it lets you do, as you can see here, is there's an accelerometer part, and what it does is, and I'll show it to you. We're going to go into a demo actually pretty soon. You can actually rotate and shift the accelerometer, and that'll then fire the appropriate events, which you can then react to. On the other side, you can see that I have the geolocation actually open. You can set your latitude and longitude instead of just picking some default that Google just decides to say this is approximately where you are. You're in Winnipeg, here you are in the center of the town. You can actually pick and choose. Down below, there's actually a map view where you can drag your cursor around, or you can supply GPX files if you want to provide a route to log that. So it's an incredibly useful tool for testing. On the BlackBerry specific side, this is actually how they build and deploy their applications for their WebWorks platform, to the new BlackBerry in the playbook. So that's what they're using. Yeah, it's a really, really cool tool. So I would recommend everybody checking it out. And there's links for that at the end of the presentation there. So, okay, we're going to do a live demo. So bear with me. And if there's any questions or if you see me horribly screw up, please let me know. Okay, so what we have here, this is actually the screenshot. I just updated the screenshot for this presentation now. So this is actually our demo application. So very simple. Actually, first of all, I'll just show some stuff with Ripple really quick. So Ripple, here's your devices. So you can actually change. These are a list of devices that they support. So we have a Bold 9900 or a Nexus 1 or iPad or whatever. You can change the orientation. So this device in particular is a 360 by 640 device. So when I rotate it, you can see, okay, it's 640. It's getting cut off because my laptop monitor is not that big. And then we have our accelerometer down here, which lets you shift and things. So it's a really useful tool when you're, because otherwise you're going to have to deploy this to an emulator or a simulator on a real phone. That can be kind of a hassle. This lets you get rid of the JavaScript bugs, the missing lines, the misfired events, the mishandled events, that kind of stuff. You can actually handle this stuff right here. And then when you get to your device, then you can start doing your tweaking. And then, of course, on the other side here is your GPS stuff. So you can just kind of drag this around, and that will update your GPS. It's a little finicky, but okay. So this is the application that our sample application. It's a very simple application. It's a note-taking application. I can go ahead and add a note, and it adds it underneath it. We can keep sort of adding notes. Very simple, trivial. The style, by the way, is using jQuery Mobile, which I understand a lot of people are probably familiar with. Very, very simple styling. At this point in time, it's purely HTML styling. It's not really doing much for us. So there's a couple of issues right off the hop. First thing, we slide this over, and we're not doing anything. It's not changing, and we have a lot more space there. So the first thing we're going to do here is, this is the HTML, by the way. So you can see here I'm loading in jQuery and jQuery Mobile, as well as their CSS, as well as my own CSS. This is the HTML here, just to kind of, looks a little intense. All this data stuff is used by jQuery Mobile to style it. That's all it's really there for. The big thing you want to pay attention to here is we have a text area with an ID of note, and we have a list with notes list. This is our JavaScript, where we have our array of notes, and whenever we add a note, I push the value of the note text area onto the notes array, and then we redisplay, we repaint the notes. To actually display the notes, Is anybody familiar with this? Put up your hand. Yes, no. Create document.create, document fragment? No? Okay, so what it is typically in jQuery, you would just go $, and then you put your HTML and you insert it. What document.create document fragment does is it actually creates a document element or an HTML element that's a fragment. There's no properties, there's nothing about it, right? It just sort of sits in memory. But the important part is it's not attached to the page. So as you can see here, I'm iterating over your notes array, or our notes array. I'm creating an element, and then I'm setting the text content, and I'm appending my li to my document fragment. Once this is all done, so let's assume we have a lot of notes, 150 notes, or maybe a better example of this would be tweets. If you have a whole bunch of tweets that are coming in and you style them all, you're going to add 100, 200, 300 tweets to it. All that gets added, and at the very end, we then attach it to the DOM, the page. And what this means is that you have one repaint. The entire time, you have one reflow and one repaint. If I went ahead and used jQuery's standard way of doing it, where you just append, 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 you're doing a repaint every insert. So if you have 150 tweets or 1,000 tweets or whatever, you're repainting and reflowing 100 times. On a desktop, you're probably not going to notice it. But on a mobile device, you could. It could be a big memory hog. You can certainly build this using a string. That is another way. The reason we're not is this is an actual LI. We can actually apply events, attach events to this right now. It's a living, breathing HTML element. It just does not, it's not on the DOM yet. So it's a really, really useful little tidbit when you're building just really simple bits of HTML. Consider this. I don't recommend it in all situations, but do consider it. And if there's a website called JSPerf, which is a performance testing site, and I found when I have a note to it, a link to it later, that I think it was something like 95% faster doing it with create document fragment versus using jQuery. So just giving a comparison. I mean, it's a big one, right? Okay, so what we want to do here. Okay, what we want to do is when we do first thing, we're going to style it based on our size of our phone. So we're going to do some media queries. So the media query syntax is you say, okay, I'm going to do against my media, which is going to be only on a screen, because we don't really need to worry about print. And for a max width of 480 pixels, we're going to go ahead and for the note, which I mentioned was the text area, we're just going to set the background color to, let's just pick green, let's say. We'll change the color of the text to white, and let's change the font variant to small caps. Okay, so what this means is that any device that has a maximum width of 480 pixels or less will style it this way. Now, if I go ahead and switch the orientation here and refresh, you'll see that we have our green. And if I start typing, this is a demo, you can see it's white text and we got our small caps. So if I switch this over, it's gone. Okay? So now, just because the other side looks kind of boring, let's add the mid-width of 481 pixels. So this will only, 481 and up. We'll style it a different way. So we'll add, let's say, background color of red and a color of white. And let's just bump up the font size, 110%. And finally, because we have so much more space, let's make it reflect that. So that's pretty big. Actually, that's way too big. Let's change that to 100. That's obnoxious. But who doesn't love red text areas, right? So test, so you can kind of see the changes quite a bit. One last one, just because it's fun. Let's do a focus. Actually, we'll do it on the small one here. Let's do a focus and just change the background color to orange, because who doesn't love orange? And finally, because again we have so much space, let's just float left the ULLI here. So if I test 2, we add them. If I rotate, it floats it to the left. Right? So you can see there that it's pretty powerful. You can style it. Now, if you've ever seen those websites where the magazine style or whatever, where you resize your browser or you go on a mobile device, actually the Winnipeg Free Press is kind of like this, but where everything scales. So you have all your sidebar, your header, your all that stuff, and when you go on a mobile device, suddenly the stories are all now in a vertical line. They're using media queries, maybe among other things, but they're using media queries. Okay, so one of the problems with this application right off the hop is that we are not saving those notes, because that's kind of useful. You hit refresh and it's gone. That is not good. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add in some HTML or some JavaScript to store that into our local storage. Local storage is pretty easy to use. All we're going to do is when we push the value of the text area into our array, we're going to go ahead and replace the local storage at a certain key with our notes array. But note that local storage stores everything as a string. So if I just go notes, right, and I hit refresh and I add this, if I go ahead, and by the way, F12 is your friend here. If you want to go into, or whatever it is on the Mac, developer tools. It's a great tool. You want to use that. So I can go ahead and go local storage, get item. So you notice I added the array, and here we're just getting a string. Well, the reason is that it's basically doing a toString on your array. It's not what we want. So first of all, let me just clear that out. And we'll go ahead and we're going to use json.stringify. Here. So if I go ahead and refresh that, I'm going to switch it. I like it bigger sized here. Here we go. Add storage, get item, notes. So now you can see that it is a JSON string of the array. If I add another one, and I rerun it, now again JSON string of an array. So great, it's stored. Now if I hit refresh, well, they're not there because I'm not doing anything with it. So now we want to actually update our display. So when we initialize, we call display notes. I've already actually put this in sort of as a shortcut for me. Typically, when we first would have come in, this would have been, it wouldn't have had that. But what we're going to do is, when we initialize, we are going to retrieve the notes array from the local storage and set it to this variable. So nice and simple. We can go notes obj equals local storage dot get item notes. Now, right off the hop, there's a problem with this. This returns a string. It doesn't return an array. We need to parse it. So we can parse notes obj, and we can go ahead and go notes equals. That's not what I wanted. There. There's another problem, though. When we first come in here, if you retrieve an item from the local storage, it's null. So I am not actually handling the null case in display notes. So just to do it, we're going to just do a quick null check. So I'm going to go actually overwrite the notes obj here. And we're going to go say notes equals, so if, okay, I'll actually not do a tertiary here, sorry, if notes obj. So if it exists, then set notes equals notes obj. Otherwise, we can reinitialize it to that. And there's our notes, been saved. Nice and handy. Works well, great. If I hit remove notes, it still clears it. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't actually clear it from local storage. So we have to do that. So when we do the remove notes, what we want to do here is we want to local storage dot remove item nm notes. We'll hit refresh, hit remove notes, hit refresh again, and it's gone. So local storage, really useful. there's a very specific use case for it. It will persist over the life of the web application, which is cool. There's a new specification coming out called IndexedDB, which is a fairly complicated API that is going to be replacing WebSQL. WebSQL was a SQL system that was built in the browser. The problem is that nobody actually had a standard for it. Nobody followed the standard. And I think it was Mozilla said, no, we need to throw this out because nobody's following the standard. And so now they're introducing IndexedDB. And IndexedDB will actually give you a much more sort of heavy-duty, maybe enterprise level SQL database for your browser. But for local storage, for what we're doing, it's perfect. Now, it's called GeoNotes. This is our application. It's called GeoNotes, and there's no geo in this. There's not a single geolocation. So that's the next step. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add a geolocation to our application. So to do geolocation queries, it's built into HTML5, and it's a very simple query. We're going to do it in the add notes here. And the way that you do that here, we're going to do it before the push, is you go navigator .geolocation .get current position. What this call does is it expects two functions passed in as parameters, two callbacks, a success and a failure. If you've ever gone to a website and it pops up at the top, do you want to allow whatever website for to get your location? If you would say no, then the failed condition would be executed, for example. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass in a callback function, pass into the get current position, and we're going to just call an error function, which I will define down here. We'll just alert something went wrong. Okay. So what this will do is it will, and in Ripple and on emulators, this call will be instantaneous. On a real device, it'll take some time because if your GPS chip isn't hot on your phone, it's not going to. It's going to say, "Hey, device, give me your GPS coordinates." Device is going to say, "Okay, sure. Let me spin it up." So it's going to go in, link up to the satellite connection, do all that stuff, and then pull the location down, and then you'll call the success. So on a real device, what you would typically want to do is either delegate this into sort of like asynchronous. So you'd say, "Give me the position," and then let the user continue what they're doing while it's getting the geolocation. Come back, maybe interrupt the user if necessary, or just go ahead and add the note or whatever the case may be. Once the success comes back. But we're working on Ripple, which is instantaneous. So I'm going to go ahead and just ignore what I just said and assume it comes back instantaneously. So what it does is it passes in an object in the get current position success callback. It's called position. So if I go ahead and I go console log position, and by the way, I'm doing the console log because it's just kind of handy, but there's no reason why you can't go and use your developer tools and set a breakpoint and step through your code and do all that kind of stuff. It works just as well like that. So if we go ahead and refresh this, and I add a note, GeoNote. So this is our position object. It has a coords. Can everybody see that? Yes. Okay. It has a coords object and it has a timestamp. The coords has the information we actually care about. So it has your accuracy, your altitude, the accuracy of the altitude, your latitude, longitude, speed, and heading. As you notice here, all these values match exactly with what Ripple gives you. So, I can go ahead and I can modify this and say, I'm actually, really high up. And if I add another note there with no heading, no validation, sorry about that, you can see that my altitude has changed. So, we can play with those settings, as I said. You can change the headings, all that kind of jazz. We can change our speed, all this kind of stuff. So what we need is we need the latitude and the longitude. So back to our application here, we're going to have to do a little bit of modification. The first thing is we're going to get our coordinates, right? And we're going to get our latitude, which is coors.latitude, and our coors.longitude. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually create, well, before we were storing a string into our arrays, right? So we're pushing our note right in there, and that's all we had. We had no other information. But now we're going to want to start adding extra information about that note. Where was that note taken? And later on in the PhoneGap demo, who was that note taken with? We're going to want all that, store that all in that information, and the string just isn't going to cut it. We're not going to go and put a pipe so we can split on and all that kind of garbage. We're going to use, JavaScript. So we're going to create a note object again, and it's going to be an object literal. So inside of here, we're going to have latitude, which is lat, longitude, which is lon, and we're going to grab the lookup value here, and we're going to set it into the value property of the object literal. Once we have that, we can go ahead and push the note object into the notes array. If I run this, I'm just going to clear this out again. If I run this again, and I add test, I'm getting a weird response here. And it's because I forgot to update the display notes. The display notes is actually grabbing, I'll show you here what it looks like. That's our note. A little more useful now. Has our lat, our long, our value, but our list entry there is not reflecting it. So what we're going to do is in our display notes, we're going to go ahead and we're going to modify the text content. So what this is doing is our notes array here, right? It's our global, which, by the way, I would generally not recommend using globals. It's not a good idea to pollute your namespace with globals. I'm doing this for demo purposes because it's fast, but typically you'd want to have your own object to store all this. So we have our notes array. We create our element, and then we're setting the text content of the li to note. Now, note now is not this value. It's actually this entire object. So what we really want to do is just change this to note.value. If I hit refresh, we're going to go ahead and actually see the correct value. Great. But now we're not doing anything with it. So I click on that and nothing happens. Let's do something with it, right? Simplest thing. I'll pull in some jQuery here. In the initialization, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use something called event delegation. Is everybody familiar with event delegation? No? No? Okay, so event delegation, if you attach a click on a button, right? You're attaching to that button. You click on it and something happens. But what if that button doesn't exist? What if you want to define your events ahead of time, and then later on that button is being created? So you either at create time add the event to that list item, or you do event delegation. And what event delegation does is it uses something called event bubbling. When you click on something, that event gets bubbled up the chain. It starts with the button, goes up to the container that holds the button, to this, all the way up to the body, right up to the very, very top. And you can actually handle that. You can say, hey, if you go body.click, you're handling all clicks within the body, no matter what. So we're going to actually leverage this. This notes list always exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, let's grab the notes list. I'm going to say on a click, when an li is clicked, and this is the syntax for the jQuery's on a event delegation system. So you define your click on the parent, and then you say, okay, and any li that's clicked, let's call this function. So what we want to do here is we're going to go ahead and do a window.open to maps.google.com. I believe it's this. Now, we need the latitude and there we go, the longitude. Now we don't have that yet, and we need to actually get it from the clicked li. So this is kind of what I typically do. This is sort of my way. Is I will actually add an attribute. I think it's actually set attribute. Oh, that's not good. And my demo's over because everything's gone. So I would set an attribute here, and I'll just use the data attributes. So we'll call it lat, note.lat, and li.set attribute, data.lon, note.lon. So that's actually going to set it to the li. If you actually inspect the element, you will see data-lat some number, data-lon some number. The other way of doing this, by the way, is attaching the event right here. We could go li.add event listener, right, and work it that way. I figured I'd do it a little differently and throw in some jQuery in here, since it's a useful language or useful framework. Okay, so now here we can just refer to this by this. This refers to the clicked element, and we can actually go ahead and go lat this.attr data-lat var lon this.attr data-lon and save, and this should work, and test, and there we go. That's where the note happened. It happened somewhere in southern Manitoba. And again, all you need to do is go ahead and move this around. If I can, there we go. Let's go way up north. Let's go see the polar bears. Where is Churchill? That one or down there? I'm terrible with geography. Okay, so we do that, and then we go ahead and say seeing polar bears. I click on this. Oh, so close. Yeah, so there you go. So there is, sort of the HTML5 APIs and the CSS media queries. So I think what we're going to do here is we're going to take a break because it's, I'm thirsty. And if you have any questions, you can come up there. I'll leave you around, whatever. But yeah, break time.
Sweet. So what are we going to see after the break there, Dan?
It will be PhoneGap, finally. After all this half an hour of me jabbering on, PhoneGap.
Such a tease. It's the cliffhanger.
It is the cliffhanger.
Super. So if
Okay, so what is PhoneGap? It's also known as Apache Cordova. A company out of Vancouver called Nitobi created PhoneGap. The story, as I heard it, goes that they wanted to do mobile development. They were a web application firm. They wanted to write mobile apps. This is the great frontier. I think it was 2006 or something like that. And so they went, all right, let's go on. Let's write some HTML apps. Let's do it. And they jumped into it and they went, well, wait a minute. Like, how do I do that? Like, I don't want to write Objective-C. I don't want to write Java. I don't want to write any of the other languages that are out there. So why can't we use HTML5? And they looked and looked and they didn't find a single thing. So they decided, well, wait a minute. There's this thing called a web container, a web view, that each platform has. And it lets you inject JavaScript, HTML5 into it. And you can use that, which is cool, except that you don't have access to any of the native APIs. The in-app browser, which is basically what it is, only lets you, show web pages. Well, that's not very useful if you wanted to do some of the, cool stuff that they wanted to do. So, long story short, they ended up having to learn all native stuff to write PhoneGap. They were relatively recently, acquired by Adobe, and then PhoneGap got open source to Cordova. I would recommend, if you're going to download PhoneGap, it's kind of like a lot of open source projects. There's Cordova, which is the source, and you can build it yourself. PhoneGap.com has the binaries. So that's where you would typically go to actually download and get your whole environment set up. So what it is it is a bridge between your native and your web layer. So I talked about the web container. When they built they injected their JavaScript and HTML files in there, they had to then take a step out and go into the native layer and write wrappers around all of things like accelerometers and contacts and calendars and all that kind of stuff, and then expose it to the web view. And that exposure, that linkage, is essentially what PhoneGap is. Well, one part of it. The other big part of it, of course, is that we can then package it, which is the other big part about it. So it provides this near write once, run anywhere on mobile. And near is appropriate because you write your JavaScript, you write your HTML5, you run it through Ripple, it all looks great, you're really happy. But when you actually go ahead and publish it and run it on your mobile device, it's not going to look exactly the same. You have to tweak, you have to change. You still need your signing keys that they all need. All these things are still there, except at least now our core of our application is going to be the same across all platforms. So it's not the perfect world, but if you're coming from, if you're already heavy duty into native, jumping into the HTML5 world is going to feel awkward sometimes when you're doing some of your UI layout. But if you're coming from the world that I was coming from, it's the same with Nitobi, which is the web application world, you come into this and you can do amazing things, but you still have headaches, right? It just comes with the territory. And of course, it's writing using our HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript stack, which is great. It's exactly what we want. So here's a pictorial form of what I basically just said. So you have your HTML5, you have your CSS, your JavaScript. It's sitting there nice and handy. PhoneGap wraps around it inside this native web view. And the native web view lets you get access to native APIs. And finally, and really this is the part that everyone really cares about, is you can package it up, bundle it up into deployable, publishable applications. So it uses a native layer, as I mentioned, keep telling you that. But the important thing to keep that in mind, the important part about it, is that to actually, you can test using a standard, any notepad. If you notice, I've been using Sublime Text, great tool. You can use any editor you have under the sun, doesn't matter. But when you want to deploy to your phone, you want to publish it to an App World or Google Play, you need to be able to open it inside of a native environment. So this means that unfortunately, like Adobe, we still don't get necessarily 100% away from native code. You still have to set up Xcode on your Mac. You're going to have to install Android's 3 million ADKs and all of the ADT, which is their Eclipse framework. You're going to have to download Visual Studio or whatever Windows Phone 8 uses and 7. You're going to have to download BlackBerry's WebWorks. You have to set all that up and build and deploy for your environment. So it's still an uphill battle. So that's something that we all have to kind of deal with. Now, the nice thing about Adobe buying PhoneGap, and Adobe's doing some pretty impressive things in the HTML5 world right now, in the mobile world. They've created a tool called PhoneGap Build. Now, what PhoneGap Build is it is essentially a web service that lets you say, hey, okay, Adobe, here's my signing keys, which is, as long as you're okay with that. Here's my signing keys. Here's my application. Give me back an iPhone app, an IPA. Give me back an Android APK. And they'll take care of it. They'll do all the stuff. You enter in, your app name, your company name, all that kind of details. You enter that in, and you go ahead and, here's my information, get my app back. Which is, there's an amazing amount of possibilities with this. I think it just exited beta. But one of the things that I can see right away is that if you're running all this stuff, assuming the build process is fast, that would be great, but you're still going to have to test it on a real phone. And when you're trying to get this perfect screen, you're literally moving pixels around or moving blocks around, having to bundle it up each time to then deploy on a real device to see what it looks like is going to be a pain. So, I'm not necessarily sure where it's going to come in your development life cycle. Where I would probably see it is, people would use it with debug keys and that kind of thing to your local phone, and then use something like PhoneGap Build in some continuous integration environment to actually send it off to PhoneGap Build, where the final app gets released and then published. That's my sort of soapbox opinion of it, but we'll see. I should also mention that Adobe Dreamweaver has really good PhoneGap support. And it has PhoneGap Build support. I'm not necessarily sure. I'm not necessarily sure how wide-ranging it is, if you still have to go to the website or not. But I do know that it is there, so you can use that. The other part that's kind of useful is the debug, PhoneGap debug. I think it's debug.phonegap.com actually. And I will say this: I tried it today. It didn't work, but it sounds neat. There's a product out there called Wiener, which is Web Inspector Remote. And the idea behind Web Inspector Remote is, the F12 that I kept hitting there, the developer tools, is essentially Web Inspector. And it lets you use that Web Inspector view on a mobile device. And what PhoneGap Debug does is you put in a script tag with a unique ID that you tell them, and you load in your app and you run on your phone, and then you go over to PhoneGap's website and you punch in the same code and launch the application. Now, it looks like it should work. It didn't work with me, and I have a feeling it's probably some firewall settings. I was just trying it out as I was digging around. Now, I really was pretty high on Ripple before. I think it's a great tool, awesome tool, I love it. However, there are issues. Specifically with PhoneGap and Ripple. I upgraded the demo here to PhoneGap 2.4, and they must have changed some of the ways that they were loading or including the PhoneGap APIs, or how they're loading their script files. Because before, when I want to load contacts, it would give me a dummy set of contacts pre-built. Now, Ripple doesn't know how to handle the contacts at all, and it comes up with a splash screen where you can actually enter in a response from a contacts.find. You can put in some JSON. It's a good workaround for now. I would imagine, especially in this mobile space where, you think about it, like 3 months ago when I did this first iteration of this sample, it worked perfectly, and in 3 months, it's completely broken. I mean, this is the world we live in, unfortunately. You know, the iteration cycle is so fast that, you know, tools that were really, really robust are now broken within a couple of months. And they'll be just as quickly fixed. You know, a person will put in a GitHub issue and it'll get fixed. So there is a shortened URL for some of the issues that I came up with for that. So, okay, so the real big question here is it better than mobile web? So mobile web can handle many, many scenarios, and it's growing. It can handle, you know, the more scenarios that mobile web can handle is growing. As I mentioned, accelerometer is, you know, supports, you know, coming in. I think on the iOS 6 browser, I think it can support accelerometer now. So, you know, you can design an app for that can actually handle that. You know, Shake app or something. You know, contacts are coming in. All these things are coming in. But the one thing a couple of things a mobile web can't handle. The first one is monetization. How do you monetize your app? If you're pushing it to App World, pretty simple. It's $1.99 or $2.99 or whatever. If you're having in-app purchases, free trial after 30 days, you know, you got to pay, or you know, you want to buy these little coins for your silly game or whatever, you know, it costs you 99 cents or whatever. How do you do that on mobile web? And the answer is you use PayPal API or Moneris API, or you use some third-party API to actually do that, which is definitely doable. But when you go in the mobile world, specifically, you know, on the Apple's App World or the Google Play, all that stuff is built in there. People have accounts. People want to be able to say, pay, done. They want to do carrier-based billing. How do you do that with mobile web? And it's, you know, you can't, basically. I mean, there are some attempts. A couple of years ago, I heard about a company called Sencha that worked with, I think it was Verizon, to actually do carrier-based billing with mobile apps. But I think it was a sample, like it was a trial, and I don't know if it ever went anywhere. But with PhoneGap, you can monetize it simply by putting in the app world with money. That being said, in-app purchasing and things like that is not handled, is not supported out of the box in PhoneGap. You need to use a PhoneGap plugin to handle that. And I'll talk about a little bit about plugins later. The second is visibility. Now I know App World has something like 700,000 apps, so you know it's a lot. But what has more search results is Google. You know, so if you're wanting your geo note-taking app, you know, on the mobile web, and you want, you know, Google to index that, first of all, you need to have good SEO to make sure it shows up. And second of all, you have to have a person entering in Google geo note-taking. At least on App World, it's on App World. Maybe you can, you know, get it featured in, you know, note-taking apps for today or something. At least there's visibility, there's searchability, it's built into it. You don't need to worry about a lot of that stuff. So visibility is a big one for that. And then the last, and this list is shrinking, as I mentioned, is access to native APIs. One of the people from Nitobi, now Adobe, I heard talk at a conference, had mentioned that their ultimate goal is that PhoneGap becomes, you know, useless, becomes out of date. Their goal is that they want mobile web to do everything. You know, why do we need to have this weird wrapper system? And you can see that happening now. You can see that the native APIs, the reason why we use PhoneGap to get access to these things, is becoming less and less. However, while the walled garden exists, PhoneGap will exist, because you at the end of the day, you need to bundle up your app to put it on App World so that person can hit a button, find my GeoNote app, and install it on their iPhone or install it on their Android device. And so PhoneGap, I don't see going away anytime soon, because App World's making a lot of money. Google Play's making a lot of money. Those guys, you know, that's a lot of money in there. So they're not going to give that up. So it'll be around for a while. Okay, so let's get into the PhoneGap demo. Now, this demo is a nice extension. It's just continuing on from where we left off. let me go back here to where we are here. Okay, so what I've done, well, first of all, I'll show a couple of things. I am doing a Android deploy, okay? So at PhoneGap.com, here are their documentation. This is the getting started with Android. To get started with PhoneGap, go to PhoneGap.com, download it, and then run one of these getting started guides. They have ones for Android, BlackBerry, iOS, etc., etc. It's very easy to do. They talk about exactly what you need, the minimum requirements, your supported stuff. What they have is they actually have a build script to create a template. So you just run a create, your path where you want it to go, the name of the project, the package name, boom, and it does everything for you. And at the end of the day, you are left with a this is it, a structure that's similar to that. So you have assets, bin, Cordova, all this stuff here. This is all jar files. This is Android specific stuff that we're trying to stay away from as much as possible. But you still need to work within the environment to deploy it to an Android device. So here and here we have our www folder. So our www folder, all I did, by the way, was I took this, the skeleton that's on line is slightly different than this. What I did is I took the skeleton from our notes, the exact same code, I copied the index file, and I pasted it in here. Okay, so it's an exact replica, so that it's a nice flow. But the one that's on the samples online, it does the same flow, but there's a skeleton and there's a finished. And the finished matches the skeleton of the PhoneGap, if that makes sense. So anyways, I've loaded in that. The CSS is the same. So if I go ahead back to, just close this up here. If I go back to here, this is our PhoneGap notes skeleton. If I load this up, you can see that it is the same application. Let me just switch back to our Nexus. What was it, a Nexus N8? Yeah. So this is the same application, right? Okay. So, and you can even see here's our notes that we had that were still there. So they're persisting, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch PhoneGap. We can switch the platform here. So I'm going to switch it to 2.0, which is the version that we're running. Okay, so the first thing we do is there's a Cordova.js file. We have to include this. It's big, long, not really important. We need to include it at the top of our script. So we go script, source, Cordova 2.4.js. Okay, very simple. It's loaded up, it's ready to go. If you're familiar with jQuery, there is a document.ready script that is available. That's so when your DOM is completely loaded, it will actually execute your code, which is important if you're attaching events and things like that. In PhoneGap, it fires a device ready event. So we don't actually use the document ready, we use a device ready. So how I'm going to handle that is I'm going to go ahead and change this function name to on device ready. And I'm going to go ahead and create my init function, and I'm going to go document.add listener device ready on device ready false. So what will happen here is if I go ahead and console log device is ready, this should execute. Device is ready. Okay. So you can already tell that we're already on PhoneGap. PhoneGap fired that event. If I switch back to mobile web, that wouldn't show up because there's no such thing as device ready. Okay, so what we're going to do is kind of a pretty simple change. It's not too heavy, and we're going to go ahead and load in contacts from our phone, right? The API, see, I still have intranet, so I'm going to leverage that and just show you the API for the contacts. This is the PhoneGap web page. Go to Docs, and here are all the things we can use. So we have accelerometer, camera, capture compass, etc., etc., etc. File. We are going to be using contacts. Excuse me. So we have contacts.find. So this is the call that we do. We say navigator.contacts.find. We pass in the array of fields that we want. If it's successful, if it's an error, and then we pass in the options. So the way that works, what we're going to do is this is going to be on device ready. Okay, so we're actually going to be right when we initialize, because once we find the contacts, we're going to update a select box. In fact, I'm actually going to do the select box now before I forget, because otherwise I'll be wondering why it fails later. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add friends. So we're going to add a label of friends, and we're going to go ahead and make a select, ID of friends, and we'll add an option, and it'll be nobody. Excuse me. Okay, so just to make sure that took, okay, now we have a drop down, friends, nobody. Right, nice and simple. So on our device here, we're going to go ahead and we first have to make we'll do our navigator.contacts.find. So as I mentioned, it takes an array of field names, so you just simply do that. The star means all fields. So typically, if you think about your contacts on any of your mobile devices, there's first name, last name, phone number, address, display name, that kind of stuff. So we're just going to get them all. And on success, we're going to call this callback. On failure, we're going to call our error, which we have. And we need to pass in some options. Now, our options are not defined. So I'm going to go ahead and create my options object, which is options. And it's a new object of contact find options, I believe. Just make sure I'm right there so we don't get any bugs. Contact find options, great. Okay, so the options, and I will mention again that when we test this on Ripple, some of the stuff isn't going to work exactly as we assume. So options.filter is your search criteria. So imagine on your phone you have your search across the top and you type in your last name or you type in a person's address and you see the results. That's what the filter is. So in this case, I'm just going to put it empty. On a real device, you would probably have the person select it, choose a friend, do a filter option, something like that. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to go, we want multiple, because otherwise it will actually retrieve the first one. So by going multiple, you're retrieving all results. Okay, so that gives us our options object, which is there. Now we need to actually handle our contacts. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to log out contacts to make sure that all works. And what we'll find here is if I go ahead and run this, it'll actually kind of blow up and it'll say, I has cheeseburger. It doesn't know what this is. It actually sees this and goes, I don't know what context.search is. I'm not familiar with this API call. What do you want me to do? So, and as I mentioned 3 months ago, this actually worked great. Now it shows this. So what you do, what I did is I wrote this contact sample JSON. So I'm basically faking the contact list. So I know I only need display name, because that's what I'm going to use. So I only put display name, and some guy, Bob Smith. So all you need to do here is just copy, paste, and then hit success. If I go ahead and check my console, you can see I'm now returning an array. If I click on it, there you go, of a contact object, and it has a display name of Dan Sly. Now what's interesting is that Ripple and PhoneGap had a contact object type. So it is taking my JSON and converting it into the contact object, and these are all the information that it has. So you can actually fill all this stuff out. Pay attention to the PhoneGap API. Some of the field names are not supported. Categories, from what I understand, is not supported in Android 2.x. A lot of the issues and things like that are listed in the documentation. Okay, so now we have the contacts. What we want to do is we actually want to simply update our select with our friends. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the doc fragment again. Document.create, ignore that. Create document, oops, right. Create document fragment. Okay. The context is an array, so I'm just going to use a for each. And I'm going to pass it into an array, contact. And what we do here is we actually create a option element. Again, I could have used this using a straight up string. It's pretty simple string system. You know, it would just be options with names. But I just want to show you the create document fragment way of doing it. So create an opt, which is a document.create element option. The opt.value is going to be the contact.display name, which, as I mentioned over here, we're setting. Okay, so if you wanted it to be person's address, or you wanted the person's last name or their nickname or something else, some other system, we would just change that to whatever we want. And then we're going to set the text content to be opt.display name again. Don't want to forget that we need to append this option to our document fragment. And then finally, we will go ahead. This will work. Actually, now we can use jQuery. It's called friends. I knew that. Friends. And we're going to append frag. Now, if I'll just copy this again. Let's go back over here and refresh. We'll get the same error message. Success. Okay, well, I have a mistake there, but there's 2 rows, so let's see what the mistake is. Display name opt. Oh, that's why. There, wrong thing. So let's try that again. No, it's still not. Let's try opt.text. Or I needed to refresh the whole page. That probably is what I needed to do. Okay, so there we go. Now we have our list of contacts. If I go ahead and add a note, hanging out, and I hit add, well, no, nothing happens. We don't see anything, right? So we need to apply. We need to grab that friend, and we need to add them to the text content, right? Now, there's a lot of different ways we could handle this. You know, a sophisticated, probably better way of doing this would be to just add the friend to the note object. We have a note object. Let's build that up. That's the way I would recommend doing it. It's not the way I'm going to do it because I want to do this faster. And what we're going to do is back down when we add a note, we're going to update the value to be actually from this friends dropdown. So when we add the note, which is that button, we're going to go ahead and find the friends. And we're going to grab the value. There we go. And all we're going to do here is we're going to just append. That's not what I'm trying to do. Append with friend. Nice and simple, not a lot of code change. So if I go over here, let me just clear up. Actually, I'll use the button since it's there for a reason. Remove notes. If I hit refresh and this comes up with our contacts, I can go ahead and success that. And then I can say, doing demo, Dan Slack, and there we go, shows the thing. If I say, not hanging out with Bob Smith, there, works. Great, nice, easy, simple, and that's and think about what we're doing there. Now I'm adding in the data, but what we're doing is we're actually querying our contacts database. That's all the contacts you have on your phone. You have access to it, and you can do whatever you want. If you want to have, again, like a Flickr application or something like that, where you're pulling in an image and you want to share it with a friend, what friend do you want? You can actually simulate that inside of a browser, inside of a mobile web application using PhoneGap. And eventually, with this mobile web, when that gets rolled out, we'll be able to do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to attempt to deploy this to my tablet. Unfortunately, you just have to show it up, like that. What was that movie? Do something, say something, like that. And you'll have to see it. You can come in after the thing if you want to take a look closer at it. I did this before earlier today, and it worked. So hopefully it will work. Okay. So this is Eclipse. This is the Android IDE that they use to deploy. We don't need to go too much into it. This is their Java file that loads, that gets auto-created for it. You don't have to worry about that because the create script will actually build it for you. The only thing you have to worry about, or we have to worry about, is this part here under access www. So that's still what it looks like. But one thing I think I'm going to change here is if we go ahead, I'm going to go back over here. If I go into the CSS, we have our media queries down here, which is the min width 480 and max width 480. Now this tablet is, I think, 1024 by 600. So I'm actually going to change that so that the sort of mobile smaller part is actually a max width of 600 and a min width of 601. So at least then if I actually orientate the tablet, it'll actually change. Because otherwise, no matter what orientation I show, it'll always show the larger screen. So I'm going to save that. Now, here's how you deploy. By the way, I would recommend if you're doing any phone development, there is an emulator. You can download the ADKs. You can then build the, it's called AVD, Android Virtual Device, and you can say it's using Android this, Android that, but nothing beats deploying to a real device, and it's so much faster. Like so if I did an emulator or simulator, I would run this, and then I would probably wait 5 or 6 minutes while it booted up and it started everything up and set everything up, and then probably not work because that's just the way what happens, it seems. But with this, all I need to do is go run Android application. Hopefully it comes up. There we go. It sees that I already have a device. Now, if you have a Samsung Galaxy, or if you have an Acer, or if you have anything like that, in the settings you can turn on development mode. I think it's USB development mode. Turn that on. If you turn that on, and then you may need to install drivers. So there's a couple of setups there. But once that's done, your device will just show up there, and then I can go ahead and click OK. Let's see while it's loading. Sure. Okay, so there's the app. You can see if I hit that, it's my entire contact list. Now that's not very good. would be wrapping a JavaScript one-line call with another function. So like, what's the point, I guess. That's my guess. I don't necessarily know. So just be aware, if something's missing and you're trying to target, the new BlackBerry 10 or older playbook or something like that, and you're missing an API, jump into the WebWorks API and see if it's there, and it probably is. Okay, so some final considerations. Okay, so resolution, platform limitations. I mentioned we can use user agent, all that kind of jazz. That website, mobilehtml5.org, it lets you say, okay, here's iOS 6, here's 5, here's Android, whatever, and here is the list of all of the HTML5 APIs that it supports. Check mark, really easy to read. You can see exactly what you can or can't do. And that is specifically for mobile web because, as I mentioned, with PhoneGap, it does let you leverage some of the other things. But if you're thinking about doing a mobile web app first, just to get your feet wet, that will tell you what your browser can or can't support. JavaScript frameworks. Obviously, I'm using jQuery Mobile on this and a little bit of jQuery. You can use any JavaScript framework you want. Doesn't matter. There's a Canvas framework you want to use it. WebGL, if the browser can support it, use it. But be aware that they may not be optimized for mobile. So jQuery, for example, still supports IE 6 and 7. There's a push, I think jQuery 2 is getting rid of all that stuff. But you have a competing framework called Zepto, which is much, much smaller. I think it's like 8K or 18K, something like that, minified. And jQuery is around 80K. If your application is asset huge, so you have your images, and especially if you're supporting the Retina display, where you need to have all these images and your app is going to be 75 meg or something like that, okay, don't worry about the size. But if you're doing a smaller application, your application can triple or more with including a JavaScript framework. If you're trying to include, like for example, underscore is another very popular application. A lot of the things it does, it just wraps common functionality. Well, if you're only using 3 things from underscore, maybe it'd be better to just look at underscore and take those 3 things and put it into your code. You know what I mean? Like why incur the entire cost of the entire thing? And not only that, but there's memory usage. If you're loading in your JavaScript and loading all these script tags, there's a memory usage, memory footprint involved. And the newer phones, yeah, they're huge, 2 gig of RAM, quad-core processors, but there's still people who are on their 3-year contract who can't get rid of their phone, and we want to make them happy too. Lastly, performance tricks. I've already talked about document.create, document fragment. That URL there, and by the way, these slides are on Speaker Deck, so you can see all these URLs if you download that. That URL shows the JS perf test that shows the performance difference between using document fragment and the jQuery's append syntax. Also, try and avoid closures. So when you do those, I did actually a lot of them with the for each or the callbacks. When you're using closures and you're closing around variables, you're using memory, and again, memory is key for mobile devices. We're kind of back in the almost golden age, early days where memory was important for desktop applications. Now they're not, but on mobile devices, they are. We need to rethink how we're doing. We can't just be sloppy with our JavaScript, even though it's so easy to do. Lastly, avoid for-in. For-in is just kind of a bad, you have to deal with your having the own property because of the inheritance system. Don't really want to get into it, but typically just avoid for-in if you can. Use a standard for loop. The last URL there is a really interesting article. It was 10 points to improve JavaScript performance. It was from a talk by a guy named Nicholas Zakis. A really interesting article, talks about those things, talks about the document fragment, talks about those closures. He does a much better job of explaining all this, goes into detail, so take a look at that. And there are some resources samples, PhoneGap itself, Ripple, that's where you can download. That URL may or may not change. I think it's still the same. Are there any questions? Questions, yeah.
While we're going through the question period, wouldn't mind filling out your evaluations if you've got in front of you, because we're giving away these fantastic Toque /pen/USB combos to people that fill out their evaluation forms. So, so with that, I will let you ask questions, please, of Dan.
Yes.
Is there two questions, I guess?
Sure.
One is I seem to remember Apple specifically kind of poo-pooing people who are using these wrapper things like PhoneGap to create apps and really preferring developers to use their native tools. I don't know. That was a while ago that I read about that. I don't know if that's still the case.
I think that. Well, okay, let me put it this way. They haven't, I mean, they could shut it down. I mean, they could, reduce, they stop support or do whatever they want to stop people from using PhoneGap, and they haven't. So, I guess that's kind of, I guess a backhanded support. But, I think that, I look at the platforms that are available right now. We have the four major, really. We have Windows Phone 8, which has a little bit of JavaScript support, although I read the other day that it's not as great as we had hoped. There's BlackBerry, which has gone full in, like they're betting the farm on this kind of stuff. You have Google, which I guess is so fragmented that they can't put in this kind of support, and then you have Apple, which isn't supporting it at all. And I look at those four, and I go, why aren't you guys supporting this, more? And other than BlackBerry, nobody else really is, and it's kind of sad, and I think it's kind of behind the times. Because if you're doing a simple application or doing something that, like a good example of this is if you're using your phone as a sensor, so like you're going around and you're just even scanning barcodes, right? That eventually gets pushed up to a central server. Why do you need to write that in Objective-C? Why do I have to, if it's just something simple where scan, send, that should be, I can do that in JavaScript in like 100 lines of code, maybe, probably less, right? Fast, quick, get it up there, done. But no, I have to write an Objective-C. So I think it's silly that they think that way. But I guess it's tacit approval, right? They let it go. So.
And the second question was, I'm totally inspired today, and I go home and I write my super note-taking app.
Yeah.
For my 10-person company. What's the and this isn't necessarily a PhoneGap question, maybe, but what's the process then of getting that app installed on my 10 people's things without necessarily having to go through AppWorld or Apple's App Store?
Yeah. Well, certainly. I mean, you on the Android devices, as I mentioned, you can turn on the developer key and push it on there without being signed. Speaking specifically about Android, you can also sign it and just do an over-the-air download. So you can actually host it up on your company's intranet, and they could just go to a browser and go download APK, it'll install it, and away you go. BlackBerry, they've changed it quite a bit. They used to be able to do over-the-air downloads, and on BlackBerry OS 7 and below, I believe you can still do over-the-air downloads. But for the Playbook and the BlackBerry 10, you need to you can push it to a work version of their BlackBerry World. So it can be like your company's, and you can, so there's something like that. And then for iOS, I believe you just need to plug the phone into an Apple and just say publish to deploy to your phone. So I think it's that simple. I'm fairly I just have been playing around with a Mac because I have a PC. I'm a PC person, so trying to get into the Mac world is So yeah.
You will, of course, with Apple, you will need the Apple developer.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. You're exactly right. You have to pay your $100 to get in the door, and the other companies. I think Google gives you you can get a free sign-in key pretty easily. And BlackBerry, it's like an hour-and-a-half process. You say, give me a sign-in key, and they send you your stuff. And it's free now. Used to cost. I unfortunately don't know anything about the Windows Phone 8 developing process yet. But yeah, I mean, typically you still have to sign, right? You have to sign your application, because if you don't sign your application, then you get into the whole malware scenario. So yeah. Thanks.
Time for maybe one more question, or one or two more questions.
Yes.
How does it compare for local storage
Well, yeah, it should. I mean, there's no reason why. Like, I'm not 100% sure how it's being stored. Like the local storage, there is a string. I think there's a certain size limit. I don't necessarily know how it's exactly saved. Like if you clear your cookies, is it gone? But it does immediately persist to your workspace. Like so, it's an immediate persistence. I don't know if that answers your question there.
With the example of like the notification video app thing,
Yeah.
if you went and took a bunch of them and then you went back to mail for like 5 minutes or something, you come back to it, I assume it would still be there?
Yeah. No, they don't. No, I guess it probably depends on sort of your browser settings. So if you clear a cache or something like that, it'll be gone. If you delete the app, it'll be gone. Yeah, I think that's typically it. I don't think there's no other reason why. It's supposed to be persistent. Like that's the whole point of it. It's supposed to persist across instances, and it's not just going to kind of degrade over time. I don't believe so. The only big thing about the IndexedDB, which is the next one, the big reason why people are pushing for that is because you're not storing it as strings. You're storing them as SQL. So you can do insert statements, selects. You can store theoretically you could store binary data. You could store blobs. You could download your entire application as a byte binary array, put into a IndexedDB, and then if they come back to it, you could say, oh, it's you're not online. Let's load the entire thing, and you can do all sorts of crazy stuff if you want it. So there's two different use cases. So.
I think with that, actually, I know there's more questions. I'm going to invite you to hang around at the end to ask Dan.
For sure.
More questions you have because we're almost out of time. What did you guys think of that presentation?